We're going to get, I don't have to turn my button on, do I? What have I got here?
And then raise the volume.
We're good.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, that's good.
We're going to get started. I want to open the word of prayer, and then we'll turn it over to our presenters. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that we have, and we pray that you would lead, guide, and direct as we look at the future of regulations and so forth in our state, that would do what's best for the people of the state of Georgia. For it's in Christ's name we pray. As we get started, our presenters are from Department of Audits, and I would request that we don't get into questions. They can present or answer any question they want to, but I'd ask that we don't ask them their opinion of any department or how they're performing, other than what they say in their presentation. You can ask them how often they do audits, how they do them, whatever you want to do, but let's don't get into specifics of any department. And yeah, no. Please introduce yourself. Each speaker, as they come, you introduce whatever, and then each speaker can do the same. And thank you, sir. Here at the podium mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So I'm Greg Griffin. I'm the state auditor, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today to share a bit about the important work that we do over at the Department of Audits and Accounts. With me today is Christina Turner, our Deputy State Auditor, and Matt Taylor, our Director of Legislative Services. They will be leading today's presentation, as I may need to step away due to a scheduling conflict with another committee meeting. So I'm going to let Christina and Matt introduce themselves in more detail, but I would take a moment of privilege, if you will, to highlight their experience. Christina has dedicated her entire career to our department, serving in key leadership roles within our financial audit division, and as recently as our deputy state auditor. So her depth of knowledge and expertise are invaluable to our team. And Matt, likewise, has had a long and distinguished career with the department. In addition to his work with our performance audits, he plays a critical role in overseeing our fiscal note process, something I know that is of great interest to this committee and the General Assembly in general. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but I will say this year, Matt and our team, we have issued a record number of fiscal notes this year since we've been counting and keeping track. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Christina. I do hope by the end of today's presentation you'll have a greater appreciation for the dedicated professionals in our department who take their role and responsibilities very seriously in promoting accountability and transparency. So,
Thanks, sir. The table mic is yours.
Well, good morning, and Greg, thank you for that nice introduction. As Greg said, I'm Christina Turner. I've been with the Department of Audits now for 25 years. I started with the department right out of college, and I started as a financial auditor. So played many roles over the course of my career, but now I work beside Greg doing whatever he really needs me to do. Today, though, I'm going to use the experience that I had with financial audits to talk to you a little bit about that topic.
And I'm Matt Taylor. I've been at the Performance Audit Division for a little over 26 years. The last 10 years I've been working on fiscal notes, tax incentive reports in the last couple of years. And so, and I'll be talking about the performance audits today.
So before we jump into our conversation on the audit types, we want to just give you a little bit of an overview of who we are and what we do. So we believe one of the most powerful tools in government is unbiased information. And so our department has a long history of that. We've been around for 100 years, and we hope that we've been able to partner with the legislature to make good decisions based on information we've been able to provide. Our job is to inform you. We report on different aspects of government. And our goal is to empower you to make the decisions that you need to make around policy decisions. So in state government, to be an independent voice for you, we are part of the legislative branch. We are not part of the executive branch. Our independence, it allows us to be your trusted partner and to provide the credible information that you need from us. We have many responsibilities at DOAA. This slide highlights 4 of our core responsibilities: our financial and performance audits, which is what we'll talk about today. We also release a tax digest, which impacts education funding. And we have a lot of legislative services, which I hope you see as part of the presentation as we proceed. So who can we audit? We have statutory authority to audit a wide variety and large number of entities at both the state and local level. Our presentation today, though, will be focused on the activities related to the state agencies and the state government. We always like to give a little bit of an idea of what our work impacts. And so our goal of our audits is to ensure transparency and accountability and to encourage compliance with state law, with federal law, with regulation. But our work is also used to help determine what Georgia's bond rating is. We also inform legislative, operational, and programmatic policy. We impact the allocation of education funding through that tax digest, and we inform state agencies on whether local governments are eligible to receive state funds. And lastly, we enable our accreditation for some of our higher education institutions, both in the university system and the technical college system of Georgia. So those are just a few high-level impacts from our work. So now we'll transition to what I think you're here to hear about. We'll start with our financial and single audits. So what do we audit? The financial and single audit encompasses a lot more than most people realize. Depending on our standards, the ones that we're following for any given engagement, we can release up to 3 audit opinions for an individual engagement. When we're doing a focused financial statement audit, our goal is to ensure the financial statements, they're accurate, they're complete, and they're in accordance with the applicable standards. This audit should provide you reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, that the financial statements fairly present the position, the performance, and the cash flows of the organization we're auditing. And typically, these audits are used by rating agencies, bond underwriters, oversight agencies, researchers, and hopefully by you as policymakers. Because we also are required to audit under government auditing standards, we also have to have a consideration of compliance with laws and regulations that could have a direct effect on the financial statements. We still are focused on the financial statements in that particular opinion, but we're looking at compliance with those laws and regulations. And we're going to look at contract and grant agreements. We're going to look at state laws, and we're also going to consider internal controls at the organization to the point that we need to plan our audit, to the point we need to get enough information to do the work that we plan to do. And then we also will report weaknesses to you that we identify as part of those processes. And the last piece that we do at many organizations, but not all, is our single audit. And the single audit is required for any organization that expends funds over a threshold. Currently, that threshold is $750,000. It has changed in the last 25 years, but it's $750,000. I think they may be thinking about raising that threshold. But in that process, we're going to review the federal expenditures of an organization, and we're going to determine which ones meet certain definitions, which is just defined by the federal government, and those are going to be the programs that we end up auditing. And so you can see on the slide, those are a couple, typically Medicaid being the big program that it is. We're going to audit that program every year. We've audited unemployment insurance for the past few years, and certainly with the influx of COVID funding, we had to do a lot of work around those federal funds as well. So we perform audits both at the individual agency level, and also we perform the audit of the state's annual comprehensive financial report. I will inevitably call that the ACFR. So if you hear ACFR, that's what I'm referring to. And we also perform the single audit for the state as a whole. On the previous slide, we talked through the purpose of these audits. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that middle column, but just to give you a little more information about the occurrence of the audits and the findings that we produce as part of our work. Financial audits typically are going to be repeated annually. In some of our bigger engagements, like the ACFR, and we will do rotations for different agencies. So we may not go back to the same agency every year. We will rotate those agencies. And the same thing is true of single audits. So depending on those factors the federal government puts before us, we're going to identify specific federal programs that we want to test. And as a result of that, that determines which agencies we will visit. So we will do the single audit every year. However, the test, the entities that we visit, those sorts of things will differ based on that risk assessment that we perform. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Our audit findings are the way we communicate internal control weaknesses, misstatements, and noncompliance to you. There are two types of audit findings. We have material weaknesses, which basically indicate that a weakness can exist at an organization that would go undetected by the organization. They would not find it as part of their normal processes and procedures. And then there's significant deficiencies, which are less in severity, but they still rise to the attention, they warrant the attention that we think those charged with governance would want to know about them, and they would want to address those. So that's your significant deficiencies. The point of our findings is to provide recommendations to address the risk, to enhance your financial reporting processes and your operations. And then we also provide recommendations around your federal program operations. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specific findings in the later part of the presentation. So a common question that we get is, how do you do this work? The short answer is it varies. It's all based on risk. So the first part of our process is to perform a risk assessment. And that process includes understanding the entity that we're auditing, getting a good understanding of the processes, the procedures that go on there, the activities, the financial statements. We do that through a series of interviews. We look at policies and procedures. We look at the laws and regulations that are applicable at that organization. We do site visits, so we go on site to the organizations and talk to the individuals there. We review documents, policies, board minutes, and all of those types of things. All of that kind of flows into our risk assessment. Based on that risk assessment, our goal is to identify where we think the biggest risk exists to the financial statements, and that's how we scope our work. So depending on the organization, that's going to drive where we focus our testing. It's all based on that risk assessment. The execution of our audit plan is going to be called field work, which is the middle column there. And field work is basically it consists of two types of testing: analytical testing or test of details. And you've probably heard of samples and things like that, but they're also, as part of test of details, we do some targeted testing. So we're looking at specific anomalies or things that fall out as part of our processes. Once we do our testing, we report. We talked a little bit on the previous slides about our opinions. So we release our opinions. We also release our findings to you, and then there's other required communications that we release to management and to those charged with governance as required by standards. So there's a lot around reporting and communication that's required as part of our standards. So what does a financial audit look like? The reports are going to vary depending on the engagement and the agency. The format and the items in a financial audit are typically going to be defined by standards. We don't have a lot of wiggle room in how we make our reports look. I wish we could make them a little more exciting sometimes so that they would grab your attention, but we are dictated by standards on how those things look. Individual agency reports can be around 70 pages, so it's pretty massive report. It includes our opinion on the financial statements and any opinions on compliance. If we do federal work, it'll include our opinion on federal compliance, and then it will include all of our findings. So all of that will be in an individual agency's report. The ACFR and the statewide single audit are a little bit different. At the state level, our opinion over the financial statements is going to be included in that particular report, the annual comprehensive financial report for the state. This report is also the report that's going to include their financial statements. So that's what you're going to get when you get that report. Normally, the ACFR is about 400 pages. It's a massive document to read and to compile. And so because we know most of our readers are busy and don't have time to read a 400-page report, in the last few years we've been able to create what we call our ACFR summary, and this is available to you on our website. And this summary helps to visualize some of the activity that's reported. So you can see some of the different pictures here on the slide. These are some of the dynamic tools that we have within this report that allow you to look at some of the pieces that are in that report without having to read the full 400 pages. So we've identified things that we think would be of interest to you, but we certainly are open to any questions if there's other things that we can provide as well. So what does a statewide single audit look like? When we perform federal work at a standalone audit, we're going to include those single audit components as part of that individual report. But on the statewide the ACFR audit, the single audit is a separate report, and that report includes our opinions on compliance, both on the laws and regulations and on the federal work. It includes our schedule of expenditures of federal awards. It includes a summary of auditor results, which is that far picture to your right on the slide. This is probably when I get asked the question, where do I need to go in the audit to really get a picture of what's going on? I always refer people to the summary of auditor results. This is going to give you your opinions. It's going to tell you whether or not we have findings that you need to be aware of. It also lists out any major programs that we will have tested as part of that engagement. And then you will have a summary of your prior year findings and their status. And you will have a summary of your current year findings. These reports are going to typically, at the state level, be about 300 pages. So we have done the same thing. We have created a summary for you available on our website. And the goal of this summary is to give you some key information about our federal spending highlights and also some key information about the findings that we have. You'll notice in some of our slides, you can see a lot of information about the influx of the COVID funding, how it's changed year over year. There's charts and graphs that kind of explain to you what level of testing we've done over federal programs, and then we again discuss our findings as part of that summary report. I know I'm going quickly. Any questions so far?
I have plenty of
Okay, sounds good. So the next thing what I wanted to mention is how a financial audit is selected. So for the state's ACFR, we have 9 different opinion units, and that's where I was saying we will do our risk assessments and we will determine which agencies we go and we do work at based on that. I believe for 24 we had about 31 state agencies that we visited. We visited about 13 colleges and about 6 technical colleges, so we had quite a spread across the state that we did that work at. For the federal programs, we follow the the federal guidance to identify the programs that we're going to test, and then we select the agencies based on those programs. For 24, we tested about 72% of the federal expenditures for the state of Georgia as part of the single audit. So the next part of the presentation is our findings. So we want to give you a little bit of an understanding of the findings that we release in the financial and federal audits. It kind of compare a financial finding versus a federal finding. The financial findings follow different governance than the federal findings. The federal findings follow the same guidance, but they're also under federal law, which we call the uniform guidance. That's what guides our testing for federal compliance. The financial findings are going to be focused largely on financial reporting. The federal findings are going to be focused on your federal compliance requirements and whether or not they were met. We consider internal controls in both of those. When we're looking at financial audits, we're looking at the financial reporting processes. And when we look at the federal audits, we're looking at the federal compliance components. We are required to test controls on federal compliance. We're not required to test controls on financial audits, but we do consider them in both types of engagements. And based on that, the basis for which our findings are built for financials, we're going to be looking at the risk of material misstatement to our financial statements. And on our federal side, we're going to be looking for material noncompliance for a major program. So for fiscal year 24, we will issue 32 prior year financial findings. 22 of those findings are findings that have been unresolved from previous years. We will issue 13 new financial findings. 7 of those findings will be repeat findings that we identified in the previous years. So there tends to be really 3 big themes when you're looking at your financial statements. We typically have what we call an accounting controls overall finding, and in that finding, we see systemic issues across the organization. So there's not one particular process or one particular balance that is impacted, but we have accounting control issues across the organization. The second type that we typically see is controls over our information systems, and this is going to be your access controls. This is going to be backup and recovery. It's going to be changes to the system, change management controls. And then the last one here, we typically have some sort of control issues over asset and liability reporting, and this varies year over year. Sometimes you'll see cash findings, you'll see accounts receivable findings, other times you'll see findings related to your liability balances. One of the biggest recommendations, I've kind of listed some of these in the slide for you to see for each one individually, but some of the biggest things that we recommend for these findings is the formalization of policies and procedures, making sure that they do timely reconciliations. The documentation is critical to the processes. A lot of times we go into an organization and they say, well, we do it, we just don't document it. It's hard to audit something that's not documented. So we encourage documentation and encourage the retention of that documentation. This recommendations get a little more specific for each individual finding, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the types of recommendations that we offer for those findings. One quick follow-up there, why would we have unresolved findings? This is often a result of many different factors. So one of the most common reasons is going to be resource constraints. I don't have the number of people I need in order to put the right controls in place. I don't have the budget. I have competing priorities. You want me to do this, this, and this. Which one's most important? We also see a little bit of resistance to change. Most of the time that resistance to change comes from a lack of understanding or a lack of training in many cases. We also see a lack of clear ownership and accountability, and this typically results when you have large organizations that have siloed communications, and what that results in is a lot of finger pointing. So nobody wants to take responsibility for the resolution of the finding. And then lastly, this there's constant change in the regulatory environment. We experience that from an audit perspective. We have to be very intentional about understanding what's changing and how we can react to that. And the agencies that we audit have that same struggle as well. From a federal perspective, we will have 51 prior year federal findings, of which 31 remain unresolved, and we will issue 26 current year findings, and 11 of those current year findings will be repeat findings, so will be findings that we've seen in the past for particular agencies. In talking to our federal compliance expert, which I am not, she identified these 5 areas as the key areas that we typically see for federal findings: inadequate reporting procedures, There are requirements to report things to the federal government. If they don't, then we're going to have to report on that. Improper or unsupported, unapproved expenditures that were not within the intent of the grant. So we will see that many times, and we'll also see that it didn't follow the right process to go through the approval. Non-compliance with performance requirements. Most of your grant awards are going to have specific performance requirements that you have to abide by, and we see that many don't comply with those requirements. Insufficient eligibility determination. This is a common one with programs that require the constituents to be eligible to receive the benefits of the program. And failure to meet special provisions. As with performance requirements, most grant awards have special provisions defined within the grant, and so we have to look and see whether they met those. On the federal side, we're going to have very similar recommendations. It's around written policies and procedures. It's around keeping adequate documentation, making sure you're following your processes and procedures, documenting any sort of assessments that you have, and really monitoring what's going on as part of the process. We also identify as part of our testing some common issues that cross many organizations. And while many of these don't rise to the level of a finding, we are going to communicate these to the auditees as part of our audit communications. And some of the recommendations that we're going to make are going to be automating any manual workflows. This greatly reduces delays and human error. We're going to advise them to reduce manual entry where possible, and this can shorten the close cycles. Standardize your documents and your reporting processes to ensure consistency and continuity. Strengthen your reconciliation processes. This is a big one. Reconciliations need to happen on a regular basis, a timely basis, and if they're not happening, it allows things to get out of whack very quickly. Enhance cross-functional communication. So this is where you have different silos within an organization. We encourage the program people to talk to financial people. That way we make sure everybody is on the same page. Strengthen internal controls. Make sure your internal controls are adjusted based on changes to your organization. And then certainly providing targeted training and cross-training. So we're going to be starting our FY25 ACFR and single audit engagements shortly. And so we just wanted to give you a couple of, or a few different risks that we see to our future audit cycles so that you're aware. We always have evolving accounting and auditing standards, so we have to be on top of that. Your agencies have to be on top of the accounting standards to make sure they're reporting appropriately, and then we have changes in the way that we have to audit each year. We are undergoing as a state the ERP system modernization, which is our next gen implementation. We are going to be looking for any type of risk that can impact our audit. Some of the common things, I've seen many implementations in my 25 years. Some of the things that we're going to look for is data migration, making sure the data transfers over. Internal controls will not be the same in the new environment as they were in the old, so has the agency taken time to look at those? Accuracy of financial reporting, who has access to what, and staff understanding. And the last one's probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now, and that's the emerging technologies and the expanding data volumes. So we can't audit the way we did when I started with the department 25 years ago. The data that underlies the financial statements has grown exponentially, and so the days of feeling comfortable with the procedures of the past is gone. So we have to adapt and we have to change. And the way that we do this is largely through the use of data analytics and AI tools. They allow us to identify smaller populations and more manageable sizes for us to do our work. The power of analytics and auditing are many, but these are a few on the slide. Improved audit efficiency. We will be able to target specific things faster with greater accuracy. It's going to give us more time to do the deep analysis that we need to do, less time focused on things that aren't as risky that we don't need to. Enhanced risk identification. We often talk about the known unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns that are out there when we're looking at financial financial information, and those may not be as apparent when we're using traditional methods, but the risk-based approach makes it more targeted. Data-driven decisions, we want to make sure that we're auditing based on what the data is telling us. Increased transparency, we're able to give you better insights about the information, and then we have the ability to do more compliance monitoring on a regular basis. My last slide is just a quick demonstration of what data analytics, and this is a very simple, I guess, example, but I thought it might help you see why this is so important to us. If you look at the left side of the slide, you'll see that there were about 318 records that we were testing around census data at this particular organization. And our expectation is that there are not many changes within that information. Typically, demographic information around census doesn't change year over year, person to person, so we're going to look for where those anomalies exist. So by doing the data analytics and doing that comparison, which is very quick, using those tools, we were able to identify that we had 5 that were in the prior year list that were not in the current year list, and 5 in the current year list that were in the prior year list. So as opposed to having to sample 318 transactions, we now have identified the 10 transactions that we really need to focus on, and that was through the use of those tools. And then you also see to the right side that there was one instance of a duplicate record. So we can go through and look at massive amounts of data, identify those duplicates, which allows us to target that testing. So that was a lot, but that is all I'm going to cover on the financial audits. I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about the performance audits.
Let's see if we've got a few questions now.
Okay.
Quickly, thank you for that. Very interesting. On page 4, you don't have to go back there, but you talk about you audited compliance with federal awards. Of course, that's not you. I understand that, but are those reports? I'm sure are they mailed out to the members? The other thing on checking how COVID money was spent. When you audit the school records, do we look into that, how they spent the CARES money and COVID money, and that's just in each school system, or is that how that works? Okay.
Yes. We will look at the federal programs at each school system, and typically when those funds came out, they were massive, and we felt like they were high risk, so we targeted those at each system.
And the reason I ask about the federal awards, we had a member have House Resolution 257 that we heard in this committee, and it kind of points to how compliance with the way money is awarded. And I thank you, and that's we'll see what questions from the members, and thank you for the presentation. Number 24.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for your presentation. I do know how to spend money. That's what my husband tells me, but very concerned about how we spend the state money. So on page 3, where you talk about who we audit, there's a square there, or a pie, for agencies, authorities, and commissions. Do you know how many of those we have that you audit?
I can't give you an exact answer. They do tend to change year over year based on reorganizations. I think I know we actually went to 31 agencies for the 24 fiscal year, but that's going to vary based on our risk assessments. There's over 60, I know, in the state's ACFR itself, but I can't tell you the exact number.
So with agencies and that sort of thing, I know that there is the governor that has department agencies and commissions, and then of course the state does. So do you audit each one separately, or are they all combined together?
There are some authorities that we're going to do standalone audits at, and that's based typically on some sort of legislation around the creation of those specific authorities. Most of the remaining are going to be part of our ACFR risk assessment. So we would go audit parts of those organizations based on what we identify as needed for our ACFR assurance.
Okay. Is it all right to ask a few more questions, Mr. Chairman, or are we on a timeline?
No, we're not, go ahead and ask a couple more, and then we'll go to another questioner and might come back to you.
Okay. All right, then on page 4, the compliance with federal award requirements. Can you tell me how much money that we get from Medicaid from federal and state? Do you know that answer? No?
I don't know that off the top of my
Okay.
head. The summary report that's on our website will give you a lot of that information there.
Okay, and I'll ask this last question because I do have more, but I think Mr. Chairman alluded to all the COVID money. Has that all been distributed at this point?
We are still in the process of testing some of that. I think most of it has been distributed, but the programs last, I think, until the fall of 2025. So we will still be auditing some of that money into our next single audit. So while I don't think any more is going out, we are still auditing it. We're still dealing with that at multiple organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming out today. I really appreciate y'all's work. I'm a big reader of y'all, so I appreciate everything y'all do. They tease me all the time about all the type of paper I have because of you guys, so thank you. That being said, I want to talk a little bit about y'all's financial audits with the local school systems.
Okay.
That's a big thing that that this committee and other local delegations have kind of looked into. Can you kind of describe that process? What kind of recommendations y'all give? And I have one last question after that.
Okay. The process is going to be very similar to what we do at the ACFR. It's just going to be on a smaller scale. We're going to go in, we're going to do the same types of risk assessment procedures. We're going to look at the individual financial statements for the school district and identify where the risk exists there. And then we're going to define our audit plan in the same way we would at the ACFR level. The numbers, quite frankly, the numbers are just a lot smaller at a school district. But the approach, the standards, all of that is the same whether we're auditing a state government or we're auditing a school district or local government. And we will do the reporting same. Typically, all of our opinions, we will issue 3 opinions on most school districts because they do expend more than the $750,000 in federal funds, and all of that information will be in one report, along with the findings and summary of auditor results. So all of that will be together for a school district engagement. And I think you had one additional part of that, recommendations. The recommendations are going to be very similar. A lot of times we're going to see informal policies and procedures at a school district, so we recommend formalizing those. Documentation, make sure when you're doing your processes and procedures, you keep the adequate documentation for us to be able to review to see that you are in fact doing it. It protects them, and it also helps us from an audit perspective. And then I think one of the common one in some of our smaller districts, we typically have a lot of segregation of duties issues. So we have people doing things within one function that probably should be split out because they may have 2 people in their finance office versus some of our larger districts that have a lot more people. And so we recommend them look for creative ways to split that. So maybe they pull somebody from a different section to come in and review reconciliations to make sure they're done correctly. So we try to give recommendations like that. Workflows, some of the things that were on the slide before, as much as you can take away some of the data entry, the manual entry, that's going to help reduce errors as well. So we encourage them to look for ways to do that.
Wonderful. And I just want to clarify, this is on financial positions, financial performance, and cash flows. Y'all don't audit operations, correct? Y'all don't do an operations audit?
No, we will look at the controls, the control processes,
Absolutely.
but we are not issuing any sort of operational opinion at this point.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Got number 25? Good.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate your work. I read your emails too, so if you wonder when those emails go out, is anybody reading it? I read it. Especially the ones, sometimes, we all have our different interests, and so sometimes some will jump out at me because I'm following an issue that I'm a little closer in on, and of course I always like that. And the summary part is helpful because, it's just kind of like, there you go, there's the meat and potatoes. So I do appreciate your work. The question I had is about the testing of the controls for federal funds. When you do that, are you randomly selecting a federal program or source of funds to testing controls? I'm sorry, I used the wrong terminology. Are you randomly doing that, or are you specifically going through a scheduled rotation of certain funds, and then once you do test the controls on those funds, you know, and again, I think I mentioned this in one of our previous meetings, I think about the Department of Education. They're the fiscal agent for CTAE, Career and Technical Ed funds. They're federal funds from USDOE, which I guess would be block granted now if they do end up getting rid of USDOE. But they have their own audit team over at DOE, and they also have controls in place for those funds, and they go through a methodical list of checking that they're being used appropriately and that no one is out of compliance with the law. But can you just explain that for a layman like me to help me understand how that process works?
Sure. Part of it, we do, some of our programs are going to be done annually, and we aren't necessarily, when testing controls, going to go across random programs. Is going to be centered around the programs that we select for testing for that year.
Okay.
So in some of the programs that don't get as much money or are not considered as risky, they will be on most likely a 3-year rotation. And so we would test the controls over those programs every 3 years. That being said, if we test controls, we find issues, we will go back and test every year to determine whether or not those findings have been resolved. So there is always going to be that follow-up, regardless of whether we do a full-blown test each year. So I'll give you an example. I think I said it earlier. Medicaid, we're going to test every year just due to the magnitude of that. You have other grants. At our colleges and universities, they get student financial aid. That is not necessarily going to be tested every year. We may test that on a 3-year rotation. And so when we select student financial aid for testing, that's when those controls come into scope.
Just another follow-up. So, and again, I'm going to go back to DOE because that's the one we're talking about right now. So with any of their federal funds, the federal agency goes away now, because right now if we fall out of compliance with how those funds are supposed to be spent, USDOE can withhold those funds to our state. And I guess, would there be a need for additional accounting procedures if that federal oversight is lost, I guess, at the state level, or would it just delete maybe a duplicate process and it would just become more incumbent upon our state agency to monitor in a more, I shouldn't say any more scrutiny because they're scrutinizing it right now. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts? That might be an unfair question about how that would play out in that scenario if we lose a federal agency, but now this sole auditing component would be on those block grant funds at the state agency level.
Right. I can't tell you, we've had a lot of discussions about what would happen on that, so I can't give you any firm answers. But if it was not, if the state was not receiving those grants through a federal government, it would not show on our CFA, our schedule of federal awards, and would not be included when we were determining the scope of our federal compliance work. So we would be testing it as part of our work at the Department of Education from a financial statement perspective. And then we also would do some testing around any sort of state compliance things that we identify with that. We do use the state, the education's work when they do their program reviews. When we go in and do our federal compliance reviews, we do review those and see that those are going on. So we have testing both at Department of Education now. When we test some of those programs like your school food program, your Title I program, we're going to test at education, and we're also going to test at the local level. So we test at both levels, and we probably, because of the amount of funds, we probably would still need to do some level of testing over that from the financial statement perspective. It just would not include a lot of the components that we do on our federal work right now.
Okay.
There's specific compliance requirements like eligibility or expenditures being allowed or unallowed. Some of those things wouldn't fall into scope under our financial audit necessarily.
Okay.
Okay.
If the thought is that it moves to another federal agency and it's a block grant, or that they change the requirements. But if there's still money coming from the federal government,
They're gonna audit it.
there's still going to be some
Yeah.
sort of requirement.
It's not like
more than
that.
likely, and it would
They'll
still,
go away.
correct.
Yeah.
They may change, and it may be a different federal agency, but I would think we would still have work to do related to those federal requirements.
Okay, thank you.
As long as it comes from the federal government, it will be included in the scope of our work.
Thank you.
Representative Whipham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess in the corporate world, say, let's take a Home Depot, for example. They're going through their audit report at the end of the year. When they issue that audit report, it might say something like, risk and, some risks that are out there. Could be tariffs, could be trade, whatever. They have that in their audit report. Thinking about from a government agency, there's a look now at how universities operate. So, for example, if a university did not scrub all their titles and has diversity in there as a title, schools are having funding pulled from them, like a Columbia, for example, for different reasons, or threatened to pull, and they're going back and forth. Is there any corresponding, statements issued to you guys when you do your audits to say the risk could be that XYZ school has a diversity officer, has a campus for gay and lesbian students or something like that? That is a risk based on the current environment. Do you guys issue those type of reports? Because that could be money that we don't get because of their actions.
We will, I can't say that we would identify those specific risks. We do look at risk to the government environment, and we issue in our letter to those chartered with governments, we identify things that we see as key risks to that organization. We have, unless it is something that has come to light through some sort of program requirement, thing like that, we aren't going to go down, to that level. But we do try to understand risk to the organization and make sure management and those chartered governance are aware of where we see that risk occurring.
Is that part of the public report that you issue, or is that a separate statement to those entities?
Well, and it's a couple different ways. It is not something that we release on our website, but any of those letters that we provide to those chartered governance or management letters are public record.
Okay, so if I ask, for example, right now, the biggest risk that I see out there for our state probably is not DOE going away. It's a university doing something that is not liked by those in DC, meaning they have certain women engineering. That is a problem right now. So any statements that have been issued to the universities, is it possible to get a copy of those? Could you forward those to me? Because I'm curious to see where our risks are and what schools and universities are at risk based on the practices they have, and I want to see how they're addressing those. Thank you.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. So I have a couple of other questions. So you said the threshold was $750,000. So if any nonprofit or agency is receiving less than $750,000, do we know how those dollars are being used and if they're being properly used? That's one question. And if some agency or department or anything on this chart does not comply, where's the accountability, or what happens, please? Thank you.
So an individual organization that expends less than $750,000 is not required to have that looked at. However, they are required in most circumstances to likely have a financial audit. So we will be looking at things from a financial audit perspective. We're going to be looking at the controls over that, just not as much around the programmatic things for those that receive less than $750,000. At the school districts, the majority of the school districts have that level of a spending, federal spending, so that's not necessarily an issue. I think in the 25 years I've been here, I've only seen one where we haven't done federal compliance work. Nonprofits and smaller agencies, that's a little bit different. However, the agencies themselves are part of our single audit, and so the statewide single audit, they're always open to be tested based on the criteria that we set. So we may not go to all of them, but they are part of our decision process and our review, and we're identifying our federal programs. Does that make sense?
Yes, and did you respond to what happens if they don't comply?
We are going to make recommendations to the federal government through our findings. Well, we're going to make recommendations to management, I'm sorry, but those findings are also reported to the federal government through the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. And so the federal cognizant agencies then review those findings and determine whether or not they are going to take action.
One quick follow-up, please. So if they don't comply, do we ever take the money away?
From the federal perspective, it would be the federal government would make that decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to ask another question. I promise I'm going to get off my soapbox. But in the audit process, you get into auditing whatever it might be, and you determine that there's been criminal activity with funds being misspent. I'm just offering a hypothetical situation. Does that get turned over to the GBI or the Attorney General? What does that process look like?
Depending on the organization, we'll determine how it goes, but we are not qualified to do the investigations to the level that law enforcement is. So if we identify some sort of criminal activity, we're going to work with, at the state level, the GBI. If we're in a school district or county, we might work with local law enforcement and then bring in the GBI as needed. So we have been involved in some of those investigations, and typically they take over the investigation. We support them however we can, provide the information that we have, If we're called to testify, we would do that as well. But they take over the investigation once it gets to that criminal side.
Well, we're going to have one more question from Representative Horner. Then we'll go on to the next presentation. And at the end, if we have questions, we'll come back and cover that.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Kind of on that frame of topic, I have two questions. One, do y'all audit the city and the counties at all, say if they receive any type of state money, to make sure that they're spending it how we dictated it? And second, go
We don't currently audit most of the state and county governments. We have legislation that requires us to review those reports for certain compliance things that are defined in the statute. And so we do that, and then we make a report to agencies that are providing them money, and basically tell them whether or not they're eligible to receive that money or not. But we don't do the specific testing at those local levels.
Perfect. And what is, on that note, say y'all find something, what is y'all's enforcement mechanisms? What brings them back into compliance? What, either unintentionally or intentionally brings them into compliance?
Real quick, Matt did want me to remind you, we do have on our website now a local government dashboard which shows you the compliance review that we do, so you can see our work there. As far as our enforcement, I often, when I talk to our auditors, I tell them we're reporters. We're not enforcers. So our job is not necessarily to enforce or to make them get into compliance. Our job is to inform management, to inform you, to inform the public that this is what we see and this is how we see it. And so that's kind of where our job ends. It is frustrating not to see our things acted on, but that's not really our job. Our job is just to tell you what's going on.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
We'll see. By asking his question, I don't have my question at the end, and I was going to ask about the cities and counties. Some of the bills we see coming through the House now and this committee, I want to remind everyone that just exactly what you said. We too are not. We will be an investigative arm and a looking into arm, and we will report to the people who have the ability to take enforcement if that ever becomes necessary. And I'm not saying that it will, but we very much are thankful for your presentation, and I'm sure we'll hear some more from you.
Greg speaking of local government right now. Greg is speaking of local government. You ready? All right. So again, I'm Matt Taylor. I'm a Deputy Director in the Performance Audit Division. I think I was also referred to as the Director of Legislative Services because I do some of that. I'm going to provide an overview of performance audit process and go through some examples of our reports, which are quite different from the financial audits. Let me get to Right, okay. So what is a performance audit? So performance audits are very different than financial audits. They are one-time reviews of programs or topics or a group of programs. It can be many years from an audit of a program until we audit that program again. Most of them consider the effectiveness of the program. We can look at efficiency, we can look at compliance. Our objectives tend to focus on program operation, so a lot of our recommendations are to the agency, but that's not the sole focus of audits. We have audits or parts of audits that look more broadly at state policies. So we recently released one on potential changes to the state health benefit plan. So that was on an operational audit. Our timeframes are not limited to a fiscal year. So financial audits are looking at a year at a time. Ours, we may look at 3 or 4 years of operations. And while recommendations for improvements are common, they're not necessary. A finding for us is not the same as a financial audit finding is a problem. In a performance audit, a finding is an answer to the objectives. So it can be positive, it can be negative, it can be neutral. So there may not be a recommendation for all findings. So how we select our performance audit, we have a good number come from the House and the Senate appropriations committees. Those are what we call special examinations. They're essentially performance audits. The committee provides topics and the questions. We make sure, talking to the budget offices, that we have a good understanding of what the interests are, and then we work independently after that to complete the audit. Those are typically requested in May, about a month after the session. We get started with those. We try to deliver those by the beginning of the session. We also have performance audits selected by the department. That's usually the performance audit division staff working with the state auditor. On the slide, you can see some of the considerations for us. It's the funding level of the programs, the number of people impacted, if there are vulnerable populations. We sometimes come across issues that we've seen in the newspaper, that we've seen in other states, other state audits. The previous engagements with agencies, that we've done other audits in there, or the financial auditors are in there, and they report something to us, and so that gets on our list. And then we have to factor in just available staff. We have a staff of 35, which is the largest we've been. But you have teams of 2 and 3. There's only so many audits that you can do at a time. And performance audits, because these are all one-off audits, we walk in there with no audit plan. We don't have guidance from the federal government. We walk in there, we have to learn about the program enough to then sit across from the commissioner and tell them how to fix the program we didn't know anything about, a year earlier. So what we audit pretty much any state agency program. I've got some examples there on the slide. We also look at some that are at the local level. We've done municipal probation. We obviously do a lot in K-12 education. We've looked at court fees. A fair number of our audits are state programs with federal requirements, so we do those as well. And so how we do our work, it's a little bit similar to the financial audits and in our planning. We spend a lot of time interviewing people, gaining an understanding of the operations. We do site visits, we review laws, regulations, a lot of agency documents, we acquire a lot of data. And then we finalize our objectives. We move into the field work. A lot of the same methodologies, but that's where we're testing. We're trying to make sure, we've gained an understanding of how they should operate. We've got some understanding of the information that they have. Now we're trying to make those final determinations. Are they doing things the way they are supposed to do them? If it's not an evaluative finding, if it's just a question, we're just gaining a better understanding. So a fair number of the requests that we get from the House and the Senate Appropriations Committee are descriptive findings. They're just, how does this operate? So that's not it's not a good or bad. Sometimes these are just questions, depending on how the question is framed, and then our discussion with the requester. And then we move to reporting. We always have an exit conference with the agency. We always want to make sure that we're on the same page, that they understand the knowledge that we've gained, make sure we haven't missed anything. It's an opportunity to clarify any misunderstandings. We provide agencies with a draft. They have a couple of weeks to respond to that. We make changes if needed, but generally there are no changes at that point. Most of the time their responses are added, so you can see the agency position. and then we release. And those are released to all legislators. Everyone gets an email. We put it on our website. The email goes to a pretty good long list of people, in addition to legislators, including the media. So you see some of the performance audits wind up in the paper or on television. And in our reports, we don't have the same opinions that you see in the financial audits. I mean, they look quite different. So we don't have these categories. They're much more nuanced. So what a performance audit looks like on the slide, you can see what our reports look like. They're typically 20 to 45 pages, a lot of narrative, charts, tables, graphics. We include an executive summary that's a couple of pages that contains the key findings or the takeaways. The report itself, we usually have a background explaining the program or the topic. That's anywhere from 5 to 10 pages, and then the rest are the findings themselves, and with the recommendations. And we provide a one-page summary. We started doing that several years ago. That helps, well, just because the reports are fairly long, and that's helped just clarify the message for everyone. And then I was going to spend a few minutes sharing a few of the performance audits that we've released over the last few years. We've done a lot, but I'm just going to go over 5 here. They demonstrate some of our work and the type of issues that we encounter. And these are not complete. This is not everything within the audit. I'm just bringing out a few points of the audit. The audits are longer and have more findings and recommendations, what I'm going to cover. So this first one is a local victims assistance program. This was we were asked to look at the funding, spending, and oversight. This was released just in December, requested by the House Appropriations Committee. These programs provide services to crime victims. We looked at CJCC, the Superior Court Clerks Cooperative Authority, local program officials. So we had worked with a lot of different parties on this audit. You can see that we found that the State Victim Services Commission, this was created by law in 2004. This was never assembled. So it's existed on paper for 21 years or 20 years before we showed up. There are consequences to that, limited oversight of the program. We have found inconsistent methods of distributing funds to local programs. If there's no certified LVAP in a county, then the money is supposed to go to the district attorney. But all counties do actually have certified LVAPs, and in that case, the county is supposed to decide how to distribute the funds. What we found is there were counties that just abdicated the responsibility, so all the funds went to the DA. In other cases, counties just didn't have a clear process for how they were going to distribute the money, or they just gave it all to the district attorney. It was just easier for the counties to do that. And you know, without the commission, there's no real guidance for the best way to distribute the money or possible ways of distributing the money or for how it should be spent. So how much should be direct services, admin, staff. And those things don't have to be rules and regulations, at least guidance. And in the absence of that commission, that was not really happening. You had all these different parties involved, so no one was really responsible. The next one I was going to talk about is the Georgia Public Defender Council. So we were asked to look at the financial practices. This was a request. This was just released a couple of months ago, requested by the Senate Appropriations Committee. So this agency has access to temporary ARPA money, and it has plans to spend about $30 million of these funds over the next couple of years on conflict cases. You know, there's still time, but we thought that there needs to be a decision and that you need to be aware of how the agency is going to proceed in January of 2027. You know, there are going to be longer waits on these cases, or they're going to have to be more funding. Georgia has a lot of conflict cases, and that's what they're using these for, and that's just going to be a challenge for the agency. Another finding, we found a lot of transactions moving funds across programs at the end of the year, and there was limited documentation to support these re-rates. This is something that the financial auditors may see in some agencies as well. You know, you understand program-based budgeting, you appropriate money to specific programs, and re-rates may occur for legitimate reasons at the end of the year, or they may just occur to make sure the expenditures match the budgets that have been provided by the General Assembly. We found that the agency regularly spends more than their monthly allotment, and then makes regular requests for mid-year adjustments. Or in 1 year that we looked at, OPB at the end of the year, allowing them to use federal funds, at year end to make sure that they were compliant with the budget. The agency points to the conflict cases and very complex cases that arise requiring the money. But what we notice, they don't really analyze their workload and the trends when determining funding needs. So what happens, and this is why we were asked to look at them, was they show up mid-year asking for money each year. And we thought that they could do a better job of analyzing their caseload and kind of predicting that. And then we also had a finding about a salary schedule. The law requires the agency to have an established salary schedule. They do not. They have not set one up. There's no documented criteria for how they do set pay. And a salary schedule is a pretty standard practice that we find, whether it's statutorily required or not. The next finding I was going to discuss is about the State Health Benefit Plan and USG health plans. We actually did a couple of reports on this. They were letter reports, slightly different format. But you may be aware that there's been some discussion of potentially moving the USG employees into the State Health Benefit Plan, with the thought that there may be some cost savings there. So we looked at this, and we actually found the opposite to be the case. And that's because the State Health Benefit Plan is now a more generous plan by comparison when you put the two together. So over the last 10 years, premiums have risen much more for USG employees than SHPP employees. And we found that the cost of moving them would be about $177 million a year. $83 million of that was attributable to the employer cost share being higher. So those of us covered by the State Health Benefit Plan, the employer is just covering more than the universities cover for their employees. And if they move to the State Health Benefit Plan, that contribution would go up. We also thought that more USG employees would sign up, and that would add a significant amount, another $92 million. So that's what brings the cost to $177. And in addition, the premiums are higher on the USG side, and there's a spousal surcharge. They have higher tobacco surcharges, lower wellness incentives. So generally, when you look at all those things, if USG employees moved over, more of them would likely sign up. We were also asked to look at cost savings for the State Health Benefit Plan that would not impact health benefits. And frankly, what we found is those are quite limited if you do not impact health benefits. But that qualifier makes it pretty difficult to save significant amounts. Without having slightly higher premiums or a change in employee cost share, there's also narrower provider networks. We noted that the State Health Benefit Plan, covers some things that are not typically common, like GLP-1 weight loss drugs, and those were more than $25 million a month just in the fall. So that had really increased a lot. So that alone is, about double the cost of moving all USG employees into State Health Benefit Plan. So just that one benefit. So the next one I was going to talk about is state purchasing, competitive bidding. This was a report we released about a year ago. It was also a request from an Appropriations Committee. We were just specifically asked to look at the compliance of state agencies when it comes to competitive bidding. And we looked at 6 agencies and universities. And so competitive bidding, it's required when purchases are more than $25 million from a vendor for similar items. There is an incredible number of purchases and issues with data. This is, looking for a problem that is known. It's a needle in a haystack. So it is really difficult. we looked at purchases made from several hundred vendors, and this was thousands of purchases. These vendors had all received more than $25,000 over the course of a year, and we found just 29 issues. So there was a lot of compliance. Most of those were related to an agency buying purchases across multiple offices or over time from the same vendor, and then it eventually reached above $25,000. So this grouping of purchases, the related purchases, led to the non-compliance. One thing that we were not asked about, but we did comment on the report, is the bidding threshold. It has been $25,000 since 2015. There's been a fair amount of inflation in that time, obviously, and what that means is more and more purchases are now subject to competitive bidding. And we thought the threshold was $25,000 in 2015. Then maybe it's time to reconsider the threshold, because there is a cost to competitive. There's a potential savings to competitive bidding. There's also a cost to competitive bidding, and we saw a lot of the non-compliance were ones that were at $28,000, $34,000. When they're non-compliant, they need to be doing those, but how much are you going to save on those? It may not be that much. So. And the last report I was going to cover is the Georgia Composite Medical Board. This is a report that we completed, it looks like over 4 years ago now, and we did a follow-up in 23. This was related to physician licensing, complaint intake, investigations, and discipline. Georgia's board, we noted, has a smaller portion of general public members than most other states. We had a lot of recommendations, probably more than 30 recommendations in this one. And this one doesn't really stand out, except it may be kind of hard to overestimate the impact that the board composition may have on the day-to-day operations of the agency and the views of the board itself. So obviously, physicians are very important, components of the board. But there's value in other perspectives, and we think that may have led to some of the issues that we saw with transparency and discipline, some of the other findings and recommendations that we had. Unlike some states, we found that Georgia does not require informed sources like hospitals and other doctors to report violations to the Composite Medical Board. After the audit, the law was changed to require reporting of sexual assault of a patient. That was something that we had come across several times, and that change was made. We noted that the Composite Medical Board was not conducting criminal background checks as required. They were not doing that when we did the audit. They were still not doing that when we did the follow-up review. They pointed to time and resources to do those. And then finally, the investigation and disciplinary process was not clearly documented. We saw cases closed without a documented basis. They could make a case that there was a reason for it, but there was no documentation. There were no sanctioning guidelines, so we saw pretty varied sanctions. The year that we did it, we did the audit. The prior year there had been 18 sanctions, but 2 years later there had been 40. So after we did all they had more than doubled. So this next slide is showing a portion of our legislative report. This on our legislative page. Those are some of the tiles. If you click on any of these tiles, you will get a one-page summary of all the reports for the last 4 years in that topic area. We've released 69 reports and follow-up reviews since 2021. There is one slide on there for tax incentive evaluations, which are not performance audits, but they are done by our division, but done by our department. They're not really done by our division. We have to contract for those. The law requires us to contract for those. I manage those, but they are done by 3 researchers. And we've released 31 of those. So there are 100 reports for your reading if you are interested in those slides. And then finally, I just wanted to go over some of our upcoming audit releases here. So next month, we have a performance audit on DCH healthcare facility regulation, another on retired teachers' return to work. That is a program created by statute just a few years ago, and in the statute, you required a performance audit this year. So we'll finish that in April. We have, in May, we have a review of Family Connections that's coming out, a performance audit, and one of the rural hospital tax credit. the rural hospital tax credit is actually an annual performance audit. It is the only annual performance audit we are required to do. I said that our performance audits are typically, one-offs, and that is, I believe, the better use of performance audit time, to point out the issues and then come back and do a follow-up. But we are, by law, doing that RHTC audit each year. And then we also have, well, I think I jumped to May. So I'm sorry. In April, we have the Act for the Single Audit that Christina pointed out will be coming out. And then later this year, we have an audit coming out on state parks, and we have one on workforce development. They'll be coming out in the fall. And then we'll have several others that come out in the fall that we do not know the topics yet, because the appropriations committees will provide those in about a month, and we'll see which ones we can do. And so we'll have a good number that come out in November and December. We have a lot that comes out right before the session. So we kind of dump it right on you right before the session. We realize that. And this is the final slide. And I just wanted to point out here, this is our contact information. And then on the right, that's just some of the things that we do for the General Assembly as a legislative agency. So that we didn't cover all of those today, obviously.
Thank you very much. You may have a question about this, but when you were talking about combining the state health benefit plan, that is University System of Georgia that you combine with on USG.
Yes.
University System.
Yes.
USG, is that what it?
Yes, USG, University System of Georgia,
Right.
USG.
Question, you mentioned when you do schools, you're talking about field work, when you do schools and things like that, they send you the financial statement, their financial balance sheet or whatever to audit, don't they? You don't do field work there at the school itself.
Yeah, we will go on site to do some of our work.
Oh, you
but
do?
We do get their financial statements up front and plan our work, and then based on the procedures we define as part of our audit plan, we'll go on site to do some of those. Typically, we're going to go do our interviews on site, and then we will also do some of our sampling, testing, things like that on site.
Yeah. You talking about field work. How much field work do you do outside of it, the Atlanta area? I mean, is it agencies that are like?
So it very much depends on the audit. So when we do schools, we do school systems and performance audits at times. We'll look at remedial education, gifted education. We will travel, and we always try to get a good geographic. We want to look at different size school systems, different parts of the state. We're looking at state parks right now, and I've got teams. I got a team. Staying in state parks all around the state. Right. We're the local workforce development. We're obviously not going to stay here in the office. I mean, we've been to we immediately during planning. We don't want to travel that far during planning because we don't have great questions. We're just trying to learn kind of a little bit about operations, and then when we get into the field work is when we have more structured interviews, and then we will make sure that we have a good representative sample around.
I guess say something like if you were doing something on licensing.
Yes.
And the Secretary of State's office, but isn't some of that licensing south of here, maybe? Macon.
It's Macon.
You would go to that if it was necessary. You go there.
Yeah, I lived in Macon for 8 weeks doing Sports and Music Hall of Fame about 20 years ago.
Okay. So, we have a few questions for you. I thank you, Representative Sanchez.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate you. Thank you for this presentation, y'all. I had a quick question specifically around the audit you did for the Georgia Public Defender Council. Mm-hmm. I know you were mentioning that they tend to ask for mid-year adjustments, and so I understand that y'all were making recommendations to help solve that. Is on the other side of that, of what you all talked about, is there not also maybe a consideration that maybe they need more funding in general? Maybe they're just chronically underfunded, and that's why they continue to ask for those appropriations?
Yeah, so that, I mean, this was a Senate appropriations request, so
right.
We had certain objectives, certain questions that we were asked, and it was about the financial management. Mm-hmm. But if we're asked a question of what does it cost per case, or how many cases do they have, that would be something we would look at. But that was not something that we looked at in this particular.
Okay, no worries. Well, I want to thank y'all for all y'all work. I think it seems like we have a pretty robust audit process, and y'all doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your presentation. So did I hear you correctly under the health plans that we are now paying for diet drugs like Ozempic, that sort of thing?
That is correct. I mean, this was a decision made a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. But yes.
I'm sorry. So it appears, or since I've been here for a long time, that we add a lot of new mandates for health care. Can you kind of give me a guesstimate of what it cost us every year, like adding Ozempic or bariatric or any other thing that we had? Because I know we voted for a few things this year already.
I believe that State Health Benefit Plan, DCH, may be able to do that, but I can't. I wouldn't want to speculate.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two, I guess, a question, comment. I guess the school districts came up a lot, but they typically have their own audit, don't they? I mean, like financial statement audit. I know Cobb County does, and I believe Cherokee and others. Is that correct?
We are statutorily required to do those. There are some school districts that do get audited by other firms just based on resourcing, but every school district is required to have a financial audit and a single audit based on the standards that we follow.
Okay, what's that thought? So now that my question comes, we had a hearing last week on business impact analysis reports. And my understanding is with fiscal notes, there's a deadline that we have to do. Has there been any conversation with you guys as far as the impact on staffing of letting us do 3 reports, every legislator asking for a business impact analysis, and then also during session? Have you guys had those conversations? And if so, is there a concern?
You're referring to the small business impact analysis?
Yes.
Legislation. So we are unsure what that volume is going to be. It's kind of an issue we have with fiscal notes. We have years with fiscal notes that as low as 59, and this year we have 130. And so there's not been a great way to estimate what that workload is going to look like. The bill also allows the work to be contracted out. It's not clear if that will be the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget that would contract for that. They contract with the Fiscal Research Center at Georgia State for the fiscal notes for tax bills. So more than likely they will contract, but we have not made a decision which entity would contract if we are going to contract. So there have not been a lot of discussions about that.
Okay, so last question. So my understanding of audits is not a profit center. So if we contract out, most likely based on a CPA by trade, most likely that will be an additional cost because they're just reporting what happens, right? They're not finding ways to save all this money. So, I mean, do your audits typically result in savings of monies or better government efficiency?
Well, our audits, performance audits, do both. I mean, we have plenty that get at operations, but I worked on one on film tax credit administration a few years ago, and the legislation passed on that. I have no doubt, results in savings of tens of millions a year.
Tens of millions.
But that is not. We don't do the audits for that point.
Gotcha.
And we don't do fiscal notes for that point.
You don't do fiscal notes.
The purpose is not savings. It is to provide you the information so you can make the decision.
Because last question, well, really a comment. So, for example, the savings you have would cover half a month of Ozempic, because to the, legislator's point that you pointed out that we're spending $25 million on weight loss drugs, but probably nothing will happen of that, because that is, you can weigh the risk. Maybe weight loss drugs help with long-term health benefits, but you just report it. You're not saving money. But thank you.
If I might add, and this is not it's not, the impact may not be as much as we might think, because there will be bipartisan opposition to that bill, and I'm not being, there'll be plenty of no votes, but if, you know, we could possibly have 50-50, so that would be, you know, 118 people that will vote no, and none of those people will ask for their 3 audits, so it's really just half the impact. I know those people that are against it won't be calling for any audits, so it may be only about half the impact of what we think it might be.
I would think every Democrat would ask for any voucher program to be audited. So I would say that you probably would have at least 270 reports that potentially come up, just like Republicans may ask about something else.
But I said it'd be bipartisan.
Yeah, it would be bipartisan, you're right. Yeah.
Representative Gamble.
Thank you, Chairman. Matt, thank you for your work. I appreciate it. And this has been really helpful to have y'all come and just give an update today. On the upcoming audits that you mentioned that are coming, and the one in the fall on workforce development, are you able to elaborate on kind of more specifically what that includes, or is that you may not be able to say? I don't know.
I could speak to what's in the plan. I can't speak to results because it's early. But this was a House Appropriations request, so this will be a special examination.
Mm-hmm.
We were asked to look at We were asked to look to identify the programs and the spending on workforce development programs, how well they're coordinated, customer service, and then performance and reporting. So those are kind of the general categories.
Okay, thank you. And then, Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more? Curious, and I know this, you gave a lot of really good examples of performance reviews that you have done, just to kind of help us understand how the process works. And I hate to put you on the spot about specific ones. I'm curious, I know these all came to us because you send those to us. In the one on state purchasing and competitive bidding, you mentioned that there is a cost to competitive bidding, and I guess everybody has to figure out where it makes sense and where it doesn't. But are you able to elaborate from that one, and then we may need to follow up offline because I don't want to put you on the spot. But are you able to elaborate kind of on what that breaking point is, or what that cost would be? Is it a time? I'm sure it's time and monetary.
It's staff time more than anything, and how long it takes to and just how long it takes to make the purchase.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
We don't have a dollar amount for it. It's kind of the logic model that we know that it takes more time when you competitively bid than when it doesn't, and so you need more staff as a result. Or you don't get things done in a timely manner, or you don't document things the way you should because there's so much work to do and they just can't get it done. And so then we find non-compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 quick questions. On the Local Victims Assistance Program sheet on page 16, is that broken down by county compliance, or is that just the full report? And if so, could we get the county breakdown?
This was not one that I worked on specifically. I don't know the level of detail they have in there. It would be the programs overall, but I can look at the report, send it to you.
Perfect. And then lastly, it's kind of a question for both of y'all. Budgetary compliance. Have we done any auditing or reporting on our budgetary compliance? And if so, when was last time? And if so, can we do it again? Thank y'all.
Right now, we do some minimal testing on budgetary compliance as part of our state compliance procedures. Years ago, when I started with the department, we did actually do a lot of testing around budgetary compliance. That is an area we're very interested in doing. We're looking on how to use some data analytics to help us to do that so that we can start to pilot some things in the fall, and we'd like to expand upon that program. We're looking for ways to allocate our staff to make that more of a priority for us. So we certainly understand the need for that, and we see your interest in it as a legislative body, and so we're trying to determine how we can make that happen.
Thank y'all very much, especially for this presentation.
Very informative, and we appreciate you guys very much. And your work is very important. And I, for one, am very much appreciative of our budget office and our Department of Audits, combined and together and separate. So we thank you, and upon that, meeting is adjourned.